starting to wonder a little bit about what I'm going to call the Kyle Shanahan effect, both in Atlanta and in San Francisco, watching the Niners tear apart the Vikings D on Sunday night. A guy that watches all of this stuff for a living, Andy Benoit. He's a staff writer for Sports Illustrated, NFL analyst, and the MMQB. He also has the 10 Things MMQB podcast that I had the pleasure of going on one time. You can check him out on Twitter at Andy_Benoit. Andy, I want to start there with the Atlanta Falcons and the Niners. How significant do you think what I am coining the Kyle Shanahan effect will be on those two teams?
I am fascinated to see that because Shanahan last year as an offensive designer was the best in the league, and it wasn't even close. And really, Ross, what he did so well is he uses his running backs and his base players, his running backs, his tight ends. He puts them in passing situations and passing formations and unusual passing formations, and it forces the defense to be very predictable because when you have running backs and tight ends on the field, the defense is going to be in a simpler coverage because they have to account for a possibility of a running play. So you get a simpler coverage, and then you make it more predictable from there. And then Shanahan's extremely good at spacing and angles and understanding how the timing of routes, when you sync them together, how that can out leverage a defense. So, and those are things you can do with any players. You don't need Julio Jones to do that. It certainly helps, and we'll find out how much it helps now that Shanahan is doing this in San Francisco. But there was a lot of subtlety and nuance in this regard to Atlanta's offense last year, and now that guy's gone. And Steve Sarkisian's going to be calling the plays, and he'll want to do some of his own wrinkles, and we'll see how that goes. It'll be fun to watch. The best offensive coordinator in football, he had the most talented offense, most likely. Now he's got maybe the least talented one, and we're going to see where both of those teams fall, and I have no idea how it's going to shake out.
Yeah, it looked pretty good the other night with Hoyer and Pierre Garçon, and Marquise Goodwin was flying out there. It'll be, like you said, very intrigued to see how that ends up playing out. Speaking of intriguing, you had your Super Bowl predictions, but you also talked about a defense that you feel like, Andy, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that the Texans have invented. Is that correct? That's relatively new in order to try to slow down the Patriots. Is that a fair statement?
Probably, and you probably encountered this too, Ross. Anytime you ask a coach, hey, how did you think that concept up? They always say, I didn't think that up. Some coach I knew 20 years ago knew a coach 10 years ago who he came up with it. I mean, everything seems to start from way back somehow. But what the Texans did last year, and they're certainly revolutionizing it as a mainstream concept now, they line up five, and this is passing situations. They line up five defensive linemen or defenders. It could be linebackers as well. They line them up just right across the front. It's very simple, and what they do is it makes 5-on-5, five blockers for five defenders. And the beauty of it is there's two beauties of it. One is it creates, especially against a team like New England, where Tom Brady likes to put everybody he can out in the route, it makes one-on-one blocking scenarios. Offensive linemen are forced to block one-on-one. And then two is the defense can decide who has to block who by just where they line the guys up. So that's what Houston does, and it forces one-on-one. But with Brady and where the concept's really evolving, and by the way, Denver did this in the 2015 championship game when they beat New England. Denver had not shown this more than 6 times all season. They did this 15 times in that game. You line up 5, but you only rush 3 of them, and then you drop 2 back. And what that does, it still gives you the one-on-one blocking because the linemen have to block the guy who's initially in front of them. The ball's designed to get out quickly because those linemen were in one-on-one blocking scenarios, but now there are 8 defenders back in coverage, so the ball can't get out quickly. And that's how you get J.J. Watt, for example, going one-on-one against Shaq Mason and Tom Brady having to hold the football. It's a great way to take away the underneath crossing routes that New England likes. It clutters the field. It also gives you a lot of disguise ability with your coverages because you've got 8 bodies to play with back there. That's kind of the trend you see in the NFL. You line up 5, and you can rush 3, 4, or 5, but where teams are making it complicated is if they rush 3 or then they blitz out of that 5-man rush.
I want to also get into quarterbacks, Andy. We're talking with Andy Benoit. Absolutely check him out on the MMQB as well as the 10 Things MMQB podcast. Here's why I'm scratching my head, Andy. We all agree that it's difficult to evaluate quarterbacks coming out of college. That part I get, and there's a lot of different reasons for that. What I find mind-boggling is the disparity, evidently, between guys like yourself and even some other guys I've read recently, Sean Fahey and others, about how good quarterbacks are that are actually playing in the NFL. I saw where Sean had Carson Wentz ranked as one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL. He said he was bad last year, bad. Yet I read in your top 400 players that you said if there was one quarterback that you could build a team around for the next 10 years, it would be Wentz. And by the way, Sean Fahey also had Cam Newton number 2. It was a great piece by him. Awesome stuff, chock full information. Those are the two that stood out to me. I guess my question is, Andy, how can we even disagree this much on how good quarterbacks are that we are all watching?
It's a great question. I don't have a good answer for that. I know when you get within the NFL and you start talking to coaches, the guys that coach these guys and have to coach against them, the disagreements really dissipate. And a lot of people in the NFL see these guys in similar lights. Now, what you prefer in a quarterback, what traits are important to you, that's where you get some difference, and that's how you get into different schemes and philosophies. But, like for example, with Cam Newton, there is not a person in the NFL that would argue anything other than Cam Newton's not a precision accuracy passer. He's a power thrower, but he's not a pinpoint passer. And that really shapes the discussion. And so if somebody doesn't see Newton in that light, it's difficult to know how to continue with the conversation because there's no right or wrong necessarily, but coaches have to play against these guys, and their opinions are going to be unadulterated because if they're wrong on Newton, they're going to lose the game. So you got to find the common ground somewhere and then try to figure out how the conversation goes from there. And I think a lot of times it's difficult to find the common ground or traits. We get confused about what quarterbacking traits are important. In the NFL, coaches prefer guys that can play on time and from the pocket because everybody is so good in the NFL that systems really matter. And whoever executes their system the best, that's who's going to have the most success. And almost every single system relies on pocket passing because it's the most efficient, it's the most stable, it's easier to coach your other 10 guys around it. So a lot of this comes down to how we view pocket passers, and I think people outside of football tend to put less of an emphasis on pocket passing and the nuances of pocket passing, and they get more enamored with highlight plays or big plays or what have you, running around, which has its place, but it's not how coaches view quarterbacking.
You got the Patriots winning the Super Bowl. I saw in your story. I guess maybe it's a two-part question. It would be, does Julian Edelman injury affect that? And if not the Patriots, then who?
Yeah. Look, I learned the hard way a few years ago Edelman's an important player because I used to think, well, he's a product of the system. He's an underneath, shifty guy. He's just Cole Beasley who happens to play with Tom Brady. But when he was out of the lineup in past years, that offense functions differently and negatively. And he also has been used as a lot more than just a slot receiver lately. So I'll be the first to say Edelman is an important player. Having said that, they have other guys who can do similar things. Danny Amendola, if he can stay healthy, that's a big if. But he can do similar things as Edelman just enough. They do such a great job with their formationing that a lot of the times it's if the receiver executes basic stuff well, the system's going to get him open anyway. So I think they can survive that one. If it's not the Patriots, to me, Pittsburgh's the most dangerous team, and they might even be the most talented team in the AFC. They have unbelievable number of weapons on offense. And that defense, Ross, in the second half of last season, that was one of the 5 best defenses in the NFL for just taking November and December. That's a young, fast unit They run a complex scheme. They dialed the scheme back last year. Everybody got comfortable, and as the season went on, they put more of the scheme back in. We're going to see a continuation of that this year. That's going to be a tough team to deal with.
All right, Andy, last question. The guys here and I are having a month draft starting next hour. What is the best month of the year?
Ooh, I like the holiday time of year. I listen to Christmas music when I watch film and have the tree on next to the TV. So I guess I'll have to say a holiday season in December, and then I'd work back November, October, September. It's all in football months. I know that.
Wow, December. So we only have 10 picks. So what would be the two that would get left out in your mind?
The 2 months, the worst 2 months.
Yeah, the worst two.
Boy, February's tough. You do get the Super Bowl in February, but you get the pressure of Valentine's Day, and that's a double-edged sword. I'd probably say February can go out, and June. What happens in June? I mean, what goes on? Does June even have a holiday in it?
June's the start of summer. I don't like that. February I can deal with. That's the kind of analysis that we brought you on for, by the way, Andy. I appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you got it. Thanks, Ross.
The Dan Patrick Show, weekday mornings on Audience.